Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a really deep question, one that comes to us from some ancient texts. How can new life, real life, spring up from situations that seem completely and utterly hopeless? We're going to explore this powerful idea about finding hope, even when you feel like you're standing in a valley of dry bones.
You know, our source material kicks things off with a fantastic metaphor, the tip of the iceberg. The idea is that what we see on the surface, despair, disaster, even death itself, that might only be the 10% we can actually see. To get the full picture, to understand what's really going on, you have to look beneath the surface. This whole concept challenges us to think, hey, maybe what looks like a dead end is actually just one part of a much, much bigger story.
So, let's talk about that. When we're faced with some overwhelming catastrophe, how do we usually react? Let's take a look at the two most common responses people have when they feel like their world is just collapsing around them.
When disaster hits, people tend to go one of two ways. First, you've got denial, just refusing to believe it's even happening. And on the other side, you've got despair. That's when you're so paralyzed by it all that you just conclude everything is lost, hope is gone. But here's the key insight from our source. Both of these paths, denial and despair, they lead to the exact same place, nowhere. They both stop you from seeing any way forward.
And to see this kind of despair play out on a massive scale, our source takes us way back to a historical example. We're talking about an entire nation that was absolutely convinced its story was over, for good. For the people of ancient Israel, this was a slow-motion train wreck that lasted for decades. First, their northern kingdom gets wiped out, then the Empire of Babylon comes in and starts chipping away at the southern kingdom, taking their best and brightest into exile. And the final blow comes in 586 BCE, when their capital city Jerusalem is totally destroyed and their sacred temple is burned to the ground. This wasn't just a political defeat. For them, it was the end of everything they knew.
And this quote from the prophet Ezekiel, wow, it just nails the feeling perfectly. He's speaking for his people in exile, and the words are just brutal. They didn't just feel sad or defeated, they felt dead. Their identity, their future, their connection to God, all of it gone. They literally saw themselves as dried up bones. So, it's in this pit of absolute hopelessness that Ezekiel has this incredible vision. He finds himself standing in a valley, and it's just full of bones. And the text makes a huge point of saying they were very dry. That's important. It means this wasn't a recent battlefield. This was old death, forgotten death. And then, right there in the middle of all that death, comes the question. The question, really. God asks Ezekiel, "Son of man, can these bones live?" I mean, think about that. It's a staggering question. Everything in him, everything you can see, screams, no way. But just by asking, God introduces this tiny crack of possibility into a situation that looks completely impossible.
So, what's the answer? Well, our source shows us that the power to turn all this death around doesn't come from some human plan. It comes from a specific spoken word, a command. And watch how this happens. It's a step-by-step miracle, and every single step is kicked off by a spoken word. First, Ezekiel is told to speak to the bones. Then you hear this incredible rattling sound as the bones start flying together, finding their match. Then sinews, flesh, and skin cover them, but they're still just corpses. There's no life. So a second command goes out, this time for breath to come into them. And in an instant, a valley of death becomes a vast living army.
You see, this whole vision wasn't just a weird dream. It was a direct promise to those helpless exiles. The message was unmistakable. You think you're dead and buried? I will literally open your graves. I'm going to bring you home, and I'm going to breathe my own spirit back into you, and you will live again. It was a word of life spoken right into the heart of their despair.
Okay, so that's the story on a huge national scale. But the source material then zooms way in to show this same life-giving power at work in some incredibly personal one-on-one stories. And this is where the focus shifts to Jesus, who is presented as the living, breathing embodiment of that life-giving word. The promise is no longer just for a nation far away. It's for individuals, for you and me, facing our own private valleys of death. Now here, the storytelling is just beautiful. We get two stories woven together, and they both hinge on the number 12. On one hand, you have a woman who has been suffering and bleeding for 12 long years. She's an outcast. On the other, you have a 12-year-old girl, the beloved daughter of a community leader, who has just died. One person has been slowly dying for 12 years. The other's 12 years of life were just snuffed out.
So the woman's story is one of pure, desperate faith, right? She's tried all the doctors, spent all her money, and nothing has worked. Now she's down to her last hope, thinking, if I can just, not even talk to him, just touch the edge of his clothes, I know I'll be healed.
And then you get this incredibly dramatic moment. At the very instant that healing power flows out of Jesus and cures the woman, a messenger pushes through the crowd to find the girl's father, Jairus. And the message is the ultimate word of despair. Your daughter is dead. It's over. Don't bother the teacher anymore. Hope and hopelessness collide right there in the same second. But Jesus overhears this, and he immediately speaks a word to counter it. He looks right at this devastated father and says something so simple but so profound. Don't be afraid, just believe. He's basically asking Jairus to make a choice. Are you going to listen to the fact of death or the word of life?
So they get to the house, and it's chaos. Everyone is weeping. Jesus goes into the room where the girl is lying, takes her by the hand, and speaks two simple words in his native language, Aramaic, Talitha cum.
And the translation is just so tender and yet so unbelievably powerful. Little girl, I say to you, get up. It's not a magical spell. It's a direct, personal, loving command from the source of life to someone who'd lost it. And just like those dry bones in the valley, her body responds to the word, and she gets up, alive. So, how do we tie all this together? We've gone from a whole nation to a single little girl. All of these stories are pointing toward one final, universal promise that goes beyond anything we've seen so far.
The source material directly connects these physical miracles to a deep spiritual truth. The core Christian teaching here is that, in a way, we are all spiritually dead in our sins. We're cut off from the true source of life. But that very same power that put bones back together and raised the little girl, that power can make us spiritually alive again through Christ.
This brings us to the ultimate hopeless situation, right? Our own physical death. But here, the perspective gets completely flipped. Our bodies are described as being like tents. They're temporary. The idea isn't that death destroys us, but that it's just like folding up a campsite before you move into your permanent home. And all of this leads to the most radical promise of all, that one day, death itself will be swallowed up by life. That's the bedrock of the Christian hope and resurrection. It completely reframes death, not as the end, but as a doorway into a greater, never-ending life. At the end of the day, it says that life, not death, always gets the final word. And that leaves us with a final question to chew on. These ancient stories are making a pretty wild claim, that a simple word from God has the power to create life from nothing, to restore hope when it's all gone, and even to conquer death itself. So the question for us is, if that's true, how should that change the way we face our own valleys, our own hopeless situations? What does it really mean to live? Thanks for joining us.